VSAT or very small aperture technology or very small aperture terminus is a satellite based communication between two ground stations, which helps to create a point to point connection or peer to peer connection between two stations which are remotely being placed, right? Now when we understand this thing, there could be two different locations. One can be placed at a location say in Delhi, another one is placed somewhere in say Bangalore, right? Now the relay of the data or connectivity can be created between these two stations using a satellite, right? Using a satellite, and that's why this becomes a very small aperture terminal technology. Now the term very small aperture over here in this particular tool comes in from the diameter of the antenna that relays the content over here, right? Precisely, usually in the communication for the satellites, the diameter of the antenna that either relays or that either receives can be large, can be equal to nearly 3.6 meters, right? At least one of them will have. Now in case of VSAT, the diameter of the antenna is very narrow, right? It can be between 75 centimeters to 1.2 meters. That's why very small aperture, right? Very small aperture of relay. Precisely in the very small aperture technology, we have the relay from one station that is being mediated through a geostationary satellite or a satellite which is nearly placed in the geostationary orbits, or it can also be those which can be geosynchronous satellites also, right? Or those which are nearly placed in the geosynchronous and geostationary orbits, right? And then it is being relayed to another VSAT terminal, right? Now over here, the VSAT which is receiving, this will have a very low diameter. This will have a very low diameter, the diameter which can be less than 3.6 meters, and that's why such type of the technologies are termed as very small aperture, right? This acts as a narrow band communication. This acts as a narrow band communication. Why do we say narrow band? Because the total bandwidth of communication is very narrow, is very low, or we can say bandwidth, the total number of radio waves which are being transmitted and received, right? That bandwidth is narrow. That's why it is a narrow band communication, and it acts as a P2P, peer to peer connection or point to point connection. From one point to another point, a communication can be created. So when we speak about it, acts as a two-way satellite ground station system, satellite ground station system, two-way, right? And the VSATs access satellite in geosynchronous orbits or geostationary orbits to relay data from small remote earth stations to each other, right? From one station to another station using a geostationary or geosynchronous satellite, right? The dish antenna is smaller than 3.8 meters or nearly 3.6 and 3.8 meters. Majority of the VSAT antennas range from 75 centimeters to 1.2 meters, which is why this becomes a very small aperture, because of this, right? The data which flows through with the communication which is being created in this is between 4 kilobit per second to 16 megabit per second, right? Not very high, not very low also, or variable rates of the data can be seen. Nowadays this has also been increased, and the data rates up to 40 megabit per second can also be achieved, right? VSAT precisely are being used for various types of the functions like point of sale transactions in credit cards, electronic point of sale, whenever there is a kind of communication or a kind of use of the credit card or the debit card, the communication is being established based on this electronic point of sale or point of sale. ATM also can be connected over here, right? ATMs are also connected. Their data is also being relayed in remote inaccessible areas where we may not have direct connectivity. Then VSAT has been established because it is also a cheaper access of satellite communication. This remains cheaper, or this also remains cost effective, right? It is also used in polling, election data, etc., or even surveys, polling, right? It also helps to transmit radio frequency identification data, connection between different stations which communicate for the radio frequency identification, right? Broadband data can also be released since it is something which can transmit up to 16 Mbps. So everything above 2 Mbps can be broadband. So that is also being used over here for the provision of satellite internet access to remote locations. VSAT can be utilized, and it also helps in VoIP, a voice over internet protocol, and the video relay as well, right? So overall, when we understand, VSATs are they are used for transportable, on the move, phased array antenna, or mobile maritime communication also, right? Mostly transportable. This is also used in news reporting, where you can see there are vans over which there is a satellite, there is a small satellite antenna which is being placed, that remains a very small aperture communication also. There are two types of the VSAT networking or methods over which the VSAT can be established or created. One is the star VSAT, where there is one network access center or network operation center, right? Using that acts as the central point. From the network operation center, right, the data is being released to different centers using VSAT, right, is being released. There could be a satellite placed, this relays the data, and this satellite helps to connect all different centers, right? That becomes a star link or a star the VSAT. There is a mesh VSAT also. Over here there is no central point of connection, right? All different centers are communicated with the help of a satellite which can be placed. One can relay the data, others can receive, and vice versa can also happen. All of them can relay and receive the data over here, right? They relay the data, receive the data. Bidirectional center can perform over here, right? That becomes a mesh based network where each and every node is connected to the other node using the VSAT based connection. This becomes a mesh based connectivity where each node is connected to each other, right? That is termed as the mesh VSAT, right? VSAT also has a very larger role to play in distance education or relay of the education based content in the remote and inaccessible areas also. So that's how we find the major role of VSAT in education also. VSAT in education, when we define, then classrooms or locations where classrooms are being held or remote classrooms can be relayed easily over the VSAT link, where we can have one classroom setup, right? And these classrooms, or we can also have a classroom setup or a studio setup, anything, right? They can be captured using a camera and a mic system, which is then being relayed using a LAN cable to a server, right? To a broadcasting server, right? This can help in broadcasting, chatting, and authentication of the content which is being received from the camera, right? That then helps to relay it to a webcam server also, right? That can have an audio video communication which is being created, right? Now using from this webcam server, we can connect directly to a VSAT hub. We can relay the content, is being received and is again being relayed to the remote location, right? Where it can be again demodulated and brought into a classroom using a projector. Now this remains as a real-time communication. This remains as a real-time relay of the classes, right, to the remote locations, helps in remote connectivity. Also, it becomes one of the important tool in digital education or e-learning, right? In this way, it can be helpful in connecting various different foster centers from the central center. Also, it will help to create online classes, right? This is also one of the important tool in conducting the online classes, relay of the content from the server or relay of the content directly from the classroom. This can also remain as a point where bidirectional relay can also come in. So over here we can connect VSAT with the feedback loop also, where real-time queries can be raised from the classroom and that can be answered immediately from the teacher also. So it becomes a bidirectional communication mode for interactive classrooms also. So eventually it also helps to establish interactive remote learning. right, which can be established with the help of VSAT. So VSAT remains as one of the important tool, right. Precisely the VSAT which has been established for the education, we can look into this. It is more reliable, and the call completion rate is very high, that is 99.5%. The call drop rates or any kind of the we can say disturbance in relay of the classroom is quite minimal. The cost of expansion is not dependent on the distance, right. The cost remains almost fixed, whatever may be the distance which is being covered. That means if the class is being relayed from Delhi and is being received in either Agra or received in somewhere in Jharkhand, somewhere in Ranchi, or is being received in Pune, or is being received in we can say Kolkata, or is being received in Bangalore, anywhere all across India, the cost of relay of the expansion would almost remain same, right. The user incurs a fixed cost for VSAT, right. So it remains cost effective, or the overall capital cost or the operational cost for establishment of such type of the technologies for remote education remains almost same, right. Communication need not pass through a ground facility. It is all connected to a satellite, so there is no ground authorization which is required, so the ground based disturbances can also be minimal, right. Transmission of huge data in less time across long distances is also feasible. This in fact remains real time, right. Being a modern telecom technology, it is suitable for a large country with areas of difficult terrain to connect, right. Eventually remote education would become easy for using VSAT. That may be school education or through various different modes. VSAT can relay the content and can be received in foster centers, and that will help in distance education, right. The major advantages: response time is much lower for VSAT, dial-up link, speed of transmission is much higher, right, up to 16 Mbps and more, up to right now VSAT can link up to 48 Mbps, right. LAN to LAN connectivity via VSAT is unique for data transfer. Point to multi-point communication can also establish, right, in a star LAN or in a star VSAT which is being created. From one point to multi-point connections can be created. The mesh remains P2P, peer-to-peer connection, whereas in the star can act from one center, from one location, or even from one studio. Multiple classrooms can be supplemented at the same time, right. There is no interruption due to frequent changes in weather, because the satellite connectivity is far more stable than even if we rely upon the connectivity using the direct point-to-point connectivity or wireless communication which is being established from direct propagation. Satellite connectivity remains more reliable. Also, since there is a narrow band of communication which is being established, right, a narrow band or narrow band of radio band is being created, so the chance of disturbance and interference is lower from the weather, because it remains more like a beam like connection. We have seen beam forming in connectivity in wireless communication, or we'll see it also in 5G. Beam forming is direct, or a narrow band is something where the radio band of connectivity remains more coherent. That means they are like a laser, right. They are being relayed from this satellite to the from the antenna to the satellite to the antenna. It is more like a straight beam which is being created when the narrow band of radio wave is being created. So chances of dispersion or interference is low over there, right. The cost management: institutions can fix their communication cost and make them utilizable also. The cost remains uniform also, and does not depend upon distance, etc., that we have seen, right. It is more predictable. Communication budget can be planned accurately, because since the cost would not flank in, so the cost remains fixed. So the overall budget of providing the digital education or distance education can also be fixed, right. Greater productivity: a single transmission medium to and the centralized monitoring and control provides higher quality and better management of the services also. And greater productivity with the sense that from one location, multiple locations can be easily catered, right. From one studio, multiple schools can be connected also all across the country, and educational content can be relayed. And a faculty of great repute can teach, so students can get uniform education all across India, right, because disparity in education also depends upon the type, the nature and the availability of the teacher also. So if there is a teacher of high repute, if he can teach over a particular studio and that can be relayed to multiple students in different locations, obviously the uniformity in education delivery would also expand, right? There is a single point of contact for operation, maintenance, rapid fault isolation and troubleshooting. So troubleshooting is far more easy for such type of the communications which are being created, right? So that remains as one of the important aspect of communication which becomes VSAT.